Welcome back to the Rich Life Realization Podcast. I have a very special guest with me today. His name is Ron Fortier. He is a pulp novelist, a comic book author, and he's best known for comic books like Popeye, Peter Pan, and the Green Hornet as well. Yeah. We'll have a really fun conversation and see what comes up.
See what develops.
You never know.
No. You saw us rolling. All right.
We're going. We're to the races.
Okay.
I really loved. I got to read your biography comic.
Okay.
It wasn't really a comic. It was more of a
It was a collection story. It's a memoir.
Yeah,
Of anecdotes that I experienced.
Yeah.
Should tell your listeners that I've been writing professionally for almost 50 years. Okay.
Wow.
So obviously there is no way you do not accumulate stories, anecdotes, all right, with people you meet, experiences you have, and those kinds of things. And looking back now, all right, after this amazing career, which is still ongoing, friends and family have been bugging me for a few years to collect those anecdotes. And, sit back and I realized, well, this isn't really a biography. I'm not going to tell you about, when I was born, where I was raised, and all the, doodads of what a biography is. But at the same time, I saw a linear narrative in those anecdotes and those experiences that I had and the places I visited, the personalities I met. And it's truly amazing. And once I sat down and worked out a timetable, it was basically my entry into the world of writing comic books and the people I met. And that again, the memoir just basically covers almost 50 years of writing comics and dealing with some of the most creative, talented people in the world.
Because you really talk about how there's a difference between comic book writers and comic book artists, and also mainstream authors too.
Right. So yeah, if you want to, all right, well, easy to pursue that. I mean, the idea of comics is the fact that it's a visual media. It's always been a visual media. And I think, if you give a 5-year-old a comic books, whether it's, Donald Duck or Archie or whatever, they're immediately going to be mesmerized by the artwork, the panels, the pages, whatever. So that idea of writing for comics basically is a discipline that people learn basically on the job training. All right. At the time I came into the business, there were no schools, there were no classes on graphics or writing comics, et cetera. That's changed now. There are different places. I mean, arguably the best is the Joe Cooper School in New Jersey, which basically trains comic book illustrators today. And so that being the case, I had to learn how to script and send them to various publishers, get all kinds of rejections along the way, until with the help of some really smart editors and some helpful hands, I began to understand the process of writing the scripts and doing them. But at the same time, it was a case of, like I said, being intuitive enough to, I'm submitting my first real manuscripts at approximately 21 years of age. So that means I've probably been reading comics for almost 19 to 18 of those years. And you don't realize what you've learned just by becoming a comic book fan, understanding how the panels work and where the word balloons go, where the captions go. So for the most part, early on in my career, it was an intuitive process. But as I began to sell scripts and to get published, then again, the process continues. All right, the education continues to the point of getting some really, really good editors who said, well, you could do this better or you could do that better. And you just keep doing it. I mean, I'd like to think the rough estimate, I probably had maybe something like 700 comic book scripts published. All right. I kind of hope that the ones I'm working on now are 10 times better than the ones I did back in 1978 or whatever. All right. It's an ongoing process. If you're really sincere about it, you have to be better. You have to try to be better. All right. So now let's shift gears. We're talking about comic book writing. That pretty much, took up most of my attention, my passion, my creative outlet for all those years until about 20 years ago. And that's when I became involved with pulp publishing, i.e. I'd always been aware of the fact that comic books were an offshoot of the pulp magazines of the Depression, right? The 1930s and 40s. And managed to pick up, facsimile copies of The Shadow and Dog Savage and those kind of things over the years. And eventually realized there was a sub-fandom out there that still exists to this day, where there are one or two actual pulp conventions held in the country. So I attended one of these and was just blown away by what pulps really were and how exciting they were at the time that they were being published. And so began to wonder if, we could write those kind of things today. All right. And by then having a network of, fellow colleagues in the comic book, business, I reached out to quite a few of the writers and artists and said, hey, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try publishing prose, anthologies and novels featuring classic pulp characters from the 1930s and 40s that have since gone public domain. And, lo and behold, all our good buddies and friends signed on. One of my dearest friends, a professional graphic artist named Rob Davis, who's worked for all the major comic companies. He did Star Trek for Marvel and DC quite a few years. Basically said, this is fun. I'll be your art director. Okay. And he's learned how to do desktop publishing, how to design novels, anthologies. He started getting in stories, and that was approximately 15 years ago. And today, if you go to Amazon, Airship 27 has close to almost 300 titles in our catalog. Okay, so that's all aside from still doing the comic book writing. Now, I'm being long-winded here, but the point is, ultimately, doing the publishing, the itch was there for myself to start writing prose. All right.
Yeah.
At one point we published maybe 5 or 6 books, and Rob turned around and said, well, am I going to write for this? I mean, he says, you're the publisher, but he says, you're a writer. And so I began to write short stories, and short stories went from one thing to another. And then the next thing you know, I'm writing novels. So that becomes another learning process. All right. Which is totally different, writing scripts or comics. All right. And learning that experience was again, an education for yours truly, because a few years back, Rob and I were both invited to a writers' conference in Oklahoma. There is an organization called the Oklahoma Fiction Writers of America, made up of like 800 professional writers from Oklahoma. And the idea is they wanted us to come and talk to them about graphic novels. Okay. Now this is post Marvel movies. So that what was happening is in the publishing business, all their editors and publishers from New York, the big publishing houses, were seeing the value of the Marvel and the comic connections. And so we're bugging these writers to write graphic novels for them. And they had no clue how to write them. Ergo, they told the committee, at next year's conference, can you get us some comic book people? And so networking, we had some friends. They put us in touch with them. And for one weekend, Rob and I spent in Norman, Oklahoma, and gave 2 90-minute workshops on how to do graphic novels. I spent 30 minutes talking about the writing process. Rob had brought, they had a slide camera there. We did a PowerPoint presentation of how he interpreted my scripts and showed his panels and his pages. And then we left the last half hour up to questions and answers. All right. So again, getting to your initial, the thing I realized when I was addressing these professional writers was to make them understand that if they wanted to write comics, then they had to supplement their egos as authors. Okay. The idea is basically what I told them was, look, if you love your words and the joy of writing is, you being verbose and, using 1,000,000 words to write this great story, then keep writing books and novels. Okay. But if you want to write comics, then you're not the primary storyteller. The primary storyteller is the artist. Writers who work in the comics have to learn economy, the fewest words possible. A comic writer builds the skeleton of the story. It's the artist who puts on the sinews, the veins, the muscles, the pretty pictures. And so that's the biggest difference in the world. Again, you need to share your goal with someone who has a different sensibility in storytelling. I'm telling a story literally. All right, you need somebody who tells it visual. The two of us have to come together and say, okay, so how do we do that together? So that, my definition of a good comic book is one where somebody picks it up and reads the story and walks away with that entire experience. They don't walk away thinking, oh, wow, those words were awesome. Or, oh, those pictures were great. Or no, that we haven't succeeded. But if they read the comic book and as a whole, it fires their imagination. All right. You know as well as I do, everybody else tends to forget. When you open a comic book, every single page there is static. It's not animation. It's not a movie. Nothing is moving on that page. Yet, time immemorial, teenage boys to young adults to adults pick that up, read it, and in your head, those panels move. They move. You see the magic. That's the magic of comics. Nothing else fires your imagination.
And the way that you describe it too, because comics is all about movement then too. It's almost like a symphony where there's movement from one panel to the next. There's connection, and then it's this symphony together because, like you said, there's that symbiotic relationship, and where you are connecting with the visual artists, and they're getting to provide it in a way that's maybe different from what you're imagining it too.
Right. Well, exactly. Okay. The challenge, and that is the challenge. Okay. The challenge is for both of you to be on the same page.
Yeah.
For both of you to realize, okay, what makes this story work? Okay. So, classic example of this is basically, and I tell people this all the time, I'm sitting in my office by myself. I'm in front of a PC and I'm writing a script. Okay. Well, over the years, I think a lot of that is due to my own growth and coming into the business as a bona fide real comic book fan. From the time I was a kid, I love the process. I love the medium. So that passion's always there when I write. But at the same time, comics led me not only to read other things, but also led me to understand what storytelling really is. So that when television came, and I'm old enough to remember when television came in, I would watch TV and I would see narrative. Whereas my parents were just enjoying the show. I would get plots and I would understand, okay, so now you're going to have to beat 15 minutes, they go to a commercial. Okay, so they've got to set this up. I would break it down. Then came movies. Right? My dad would take me to Saturday afternoon matinees, see westerns or monsters, whatever, right? And the second part of all this, like I said, self-education as a storyteller was the cinema aspects of comics. Okay, comics, the beauty of comics is way before CGI was born. All right, you have people like Jack Kirby who loved movies. And Kirby took that whole giant panoramic concept to the blank page. And he'd have his figures jumping out of the panels, crossing panels, whatever. He got the concept of the flow, what you're talking about, motion. All right. One of the things that amazes constantly about good graphic artists, good comic book artists, is their own storytelling intuition. All right. Whereas the way they set up a page, I'm going to write a script. I'm going to say page 4. I'm going to say panel 1, panel 2. What happens in that panel? All right. And that's basically it. Panel 3, panel 4, this is what happens in that panel. All right. I hand that off to the artist. Well, the artist is going to read that little skimpy exposition, okay, what I've done. But now he's going to turn around and look at the panels, and basically they all do this. They might not realize they do this, but in basically sketching, well, how am I going to lay out those 5 panels? Because one of those panels, as far as he or she is concerned, is what we call the primary panel on the page. And the others will revolve around it. So that's number 1. What does he consider, or she, the primary panel? Okay.
Yeah.
How do you put that? How do you draw that on the page so it stays within the parameter of that visual storytelling? You always want your reader to look at one panel and have his eye totally move from that panel to the next panel. All right. So the tricks of that trade are basically you have figures moving towards the right. Then you go to the right panel, you have figures again moving. A lot of people don't understand this, but American comics, where we go left to right when we read, okay, is basically every single comic page published in this character is based on the letter Z. You open your page and you go zoom, then you go down and zoom. All right. The only time we get followed up with that is Japanese go the other way.
Yeah.
The first time I ever looked at a manga, what the heck? And I had to reorientate my head. But they do the same thing. It's the same flow and action. It's just going the other way, which is culturally not what we're used to. So, as simple as that sounds, it's anything but. I have met professional artists. I mean, I had a friend who was an art teacher at a college in Florida. I mean, this guy could draw anything in the world. He could paint. All right. I mean, just a really brilliant artist. Okay. So one day we're having coffee. We're down, my wife and I were in Florida visiting, and knowing what I did, he went, Ron, he said, can you write me a comic book script? He said, give me something, 8 pages, whatever. I wanted to draw a comic. All right. He said, I think they're so cool, whatever. Okay. Came back home, wrote him an 8-page script, a crime story. Send him the script. I said, here you go, John. Well, he got it done. It took him, I don't know, like 4 months. All right. And you can see every panel was so static. It just existed in and of itself. There was no connection with the next. He couldn't do that. So that when he finished those 8 pages, right, I looked at him and I said, so what do you think of the experience? And he started laughing. So I'm going to stick to teaching art. And he goes, whatever that trick is that comic book artists have, he said, I don't have it. And he said, I was well aware of that after 2 or 3 pages, because I look at them and all I saw was panels, separate pictures, all independent of each other, but they weren't working together. So again, it's like, what frosts me all the time, Rich, is you hear people all the time say, oh, I can teach anybody to write. Yeah, okay. I can teach anybody to draw. Yeah, okay. You know what you can do like that with that? The misnomer with that is, yeah, you can teach anybody to write technically. Good spelling, proper grammar, all those things.
Yeah.
You can teach somebody to draw, how to do all the techniques properly, right? Point of view, anatomy, and do all that. What you cannot teach is what they were born with. It's the gift. It's storytelling. All right. You can teach somebody perfect English and they can write a beautifully technical book, but it'll probably put people to sleep. All right. You can do the same thing with an artist. Like my friend John, that was a classic example of that. John's a gifted artist. He's not a storyteller. Okay. That's the gift. The gift is telling a story. Yeah.
When too, you use that intuition as a storyteller, and when you're building those scripts a lot, like in The Terminator, you said, well, really, this is a war story. This isn't like some like soldier story. It's not just about John Connor. It's about the whole cast. It's about the war. Or another example that you had was that the Green Hornet, that is a family story. It's about the family and the legacy that they have.
Right. So basically, if you come into writing comics, back even when I entered into it and even today, all right, if you're lucky enough, if you're good enough, if you can, interest editors and publishers to buy your material and scripts, fine, well, there's two avenues you're ultimately going to go down, all right? You can go to an established publisher, we'll use the big two, DC and Marvel, all right, and say, I want to work with you. Okay, well, if that's going to happen, the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to give you an assignment to write one of their properties, all right? So that's all well and good. It's a great avenue to that. You're just talking in your introduction. I mean, I've written characters like Peter Pan, Rambo, Popeye. Even Green Hornet was an established character. Yeah. All right. All well and good, but then you have to do your homework. You have to do your research. You have to see what other people have done with those characters. And in my particular case with the Green Hornet, the idea was the Hornet had been around since the late 30s as a radio character. Yeah. All right. Ultimately, in the 40s, he went into movie serials. There were two movie serials made, one in 1940 called The Green Hornet, and then it was so well received from Universal Studios, they made a second called The Green Hornet Strikes Again. Along about all this time, there's a company called Fawcett that was making Green Hornet comics. Okay, so we get into the 50s and 60s, and the radio show's gone. Fawcett no longer exists. There's no more comics. And we go all the way to the mid 60s when ABC revives the character in that now classic half-hour action series, The Green Hornet, with Van Williams as the Green Hornet and Bruce Lee becomes a star playing Kato, his chauffeur. All right. So one season, that's all about, but it changed a lot of things for a lot of people. It made, like I said, Bruce Lee a superstar overnight. Anyways, years later, a friend of mine, an artist friend of mine from Texas, calls me up and says, I want to do a Green Hornet comic. Now, when the TV series had been on, Dell Comics had actually done three Green Hornet comic books based on the TV series. Mm-hmm. And they have what they'll call those photo covers of Williams and Lee on the covers and whatever. Dan Spiegel was the artist. They were beautiful comics in there, collector's items, let me tell you. But anyways, so here's my buddy, right, Steve from Texas. He said, you want to join me in this? I said, well, what do you got in mind? He says, let's do what they did and let's modernize the Green Hornet for today. So now we're in the 80s. All right, it's going on almost 20 years since a TV show. All right. So basically, I said, well, let me do my homework and I'll get back. Okay, so that homework consisted of my studying the character, getting actual radio recordings from the radio show and listening to those, all right, and digging up articles on the Green Hornet, all right, and research articles. And I amassed a bunch of stuff. And here's the thing, Rich. After doing all of that, it began to dawn on me that history was so rich. And here I was just going to just ignore it completely and create a brand new Green Hornet. Right, there we go. And then a female Kato. That was what Steve had thought of. But the more I kept thinking about it, I didn't feel comfortable because I actually love all those different, incarnations of the character and started to wonder, would there be a way to connect them all? Leading up from the 40s to, by then we were in the 80s. We were fastly getting out of the 80s. And basically end the whole little family saga to the introduction of our version of the Hornet and the new Kato. And so, again, we're talking about on-the-job training. Generally, when you make a proposal to send to a comic book publisher, the rule of thumb is brevity. You don't do more than 4 or 5 pages of a proposal. That's what you hand off. Okay, if you have some sample art by an artist you're working with, even better. But that's pretty much it, because most editors sit there and see 20, 30, 40 submissions every day. All right. Well, by the time I finished writing a proposal that would include this whole family buildup, I had a proposal package that was over 45 pages long. It was like a small telephone. And my naivety had no clue how I stepped off that cliff. And as it turns out, that year I was off to San Diego, to the big San Diego Comic Con, first time ever, because myself and one of my dear good friends and artist friends, Gary Cato of Hawaii, and I had finally broken into the prose. We'd done a few scripts, we'd been published, and ultimately that led a professional writer editor named Mike Friedrich to become aware of us. Now, Mike had started out working as a writer editor at Marvel Comics. And after about 6, 7 years in that field, he saw the need for an agency that would represent writers and artists. And that's what he started. He started an agency called Star Reach, right? And so he called Gary and basically recruited Gary as one of his clients. At which point, Gary turned around and said, well, you ought to talk to Ron. Ron writes the stories. Sure enough, next thing you know, I get a call from California. It's Mike Friedrich. He said, I'd like you to be one of my clients. Mm-hmm. All right. So, send me contracts, right? He's going to get a percentage, whatever, but he's going to find me work. But as typical agency things work. At the same time, though, he turns around and goes, well, he says, the San Diego Comic Con is coming next month. So that you're coming. And I had absolutely no plans to go to San Diego. Right? I mean, I'd been in the business by then, maybe 5 or 6 years. I'd published small independent comics from various, the Popeye comic, or a few other things. And, just the thought of going to this, con with 60,000 other fans and top-notch professionals, like, yeah, I'm not ready for that. And Mike's argument was, oh, yeah, you are. This is what this is about. You have to come to this convention so that I can introduce you to the right people. We start networking till ultimately. Okay, it makes sense. My wife jumps on board. There's a trip to San Diego. Why not? All right, let's go. And so I'm trying to remember. This was 1989. Go to the San Diego Comic Con, and that's where I got the job to write the Terminator comic for Now Comics out of Chicago. All right. Now we're getting ready to leave, and as you alluded to in my memoirs, there's a story behind Terminator and my getting it and how that happened. But I want to move on to, we're getting ready to leave. I've agreed to write the Terminator comic for Now Comics. And we're 20 minutes from getting on the shuttle and we're going back to the airport in San Diego. And I tell my wife, well, let's go over to the Now table and say goodbye to the people there. And I'll remind them I'll send, a script and some plot outlines as soon as we get back home. So we go over and the publisher's standing there. He sees me come over and shake hands. And it's really nice meeting you. I'm looking forward to reading his scripts and hope you can help us out, blah, blah, blah. And somewheres in that little tiny conversation, he comes up with this thing about, man, there are so many great characters out there that are no longer being published as comic adventures. And he rattles off Flash Gordon, Tarzan, the Green Hornet. When I hear the Green Hornet, I pull up my valise. I've been carrying that script around my valise for 4 days. I plopped it down on the table in front of me. He looks at me, I open it up, I take it out, I take out this huge proposal, hand it to him. He goes, what's this? I said, that's a proposal for a brand new Green Hornet comic. Now he's flipping through it, and he sees samples of Steve's art and sees where I'm doing the legacy stuff. And now he's looking. He goes, you did this? I said, yeah, I did this. I said, this is what I'd like to write. Oh, all right. He goes, well, look, he says, I'll see if I can find out who the license holder is and the copyrights and blah, blah. And I just looked at him. I said, look at the last page. When you look at the last page, and there it all was. I had done my homework. Telephone numbers, address, everybody you had to talk to get the rights. That impressed to no end. We shook hands, said goodbye. Said, I am going to follow this up. And I don't know if he is or not. I come home, and within a week, I'm writing Terminator scripts, and this goes on for maybe 2 months, right? And one night, phone rings, I pick it up, and it's the publisher. Hey, Ron, you'll never guess where I'm at. I'm like, no, I guess I won't. Right. I'm in New York. Okay. He said, I sent your proposal to the people who own the rights to the Green Hornet. And it was a holding company called Leisure Concepts that managed the property for the family that actually owned the property. All right. So Tony had called the publisher and send them the script. And upon reading the script, they got back and told them they wanted him out to New York. They wanted to talk to him. So he said, I'm going in tomorrow for a conference and we're going to find out what's going on. Okay. He said, I'll give you a call tomorrow night. All right. I hung up the phone. My wife looked at me and I said, he's in New York and they read my proposal. So believe me, next day was like one of the longest days of my life. All right. I mean, I had a day job.
You're staring at the phone.
I'm married. I have children and I work. I work at a factory, a General Electric factory all the time. I'm still writing, on the side because I had responsibilities. I had a family to bring up. And if you're a freelancer, I don't care what you're doing, there's never any guarantees next week you'll have a job. All right. So I never gave up that responsibility. I wanted a steady paycheck coming every day. And happily I did 30 years there. I got a nice pension, whatever. But the idea is, I tell people all the time, GE fed the body, the writing fed the soul. Anyways, to wrap this story up, I'm at the factory, work all day, can't wait to get home. My wife and I sitting there, she's getting dinner ready, and the phone rings. Here we go. So I pick up the phone, it's the publisher again. He goes, get ready to start writing Green Hornet. And I'm like, dumbfounded. He says, this is what I had learned. He said, over the last 10 years, every major comic company had approached them to get the rights to do the Green Hornet. That included Marvel and DC and others, Dark Horse, Image, whatever. But they'd all fallen into the old trap. They just wanted to do a different new Green Hornet. Mine was the only one that went way back to the radio days and tied all those characters together as one family. And they absolutely, they loved it. And they basically told the publisher that if I was the guy writing it, that's what they wanted to see in the comics. And they gave him the contract to do it. And so, like I said, within 3 months of going to San Diego, I was writing 2 monthly comics. Terminator, I would write the Terminator 1 week. I would write a Green Hornet the following week. And then the last 2 weeks of the month, I would devote to writing other projects I was working on, independent stuff that I was still trying to sell to other companies and create my own characters. So here, that's the other half of this whole story. It's a blast to work on established characters. Okay. I mean, writing Popeye, I had a ball. It's so much fun. Okay. He's such a great, iconic American cartoon character. Okay. So the same applies to Peter Pan. I loved Peter Pan as a kid. The opportunity to write Peter Pan was a joy. All right. Doing the Green Hornet, I had all that weight of all that history behind this character. Don't flub it up. All right. All right. But then the other half of, the concept of comic writing is along the way. I wanted to create my own characters. And over the years, I have done it. All right. And now, whatever, that's what I do. All right. Most of my comic writing is totally based on my own characters, which is ironic and funny because now I'm writing prose, and a lot of the prose I write is based on old pulp characters. So once again, working off other great masters of the past.
Kind of standing on the shoulders.
Always.
Yeah.
I mean, it bothers me sometimes that young artists, not so much writers. I don't think so much writers. I think writers have a sensitivity to history, much more so than artists. All right. And the reason I say that is because I've been to way too many conventions in my life to see young artists who grew up reading Marvel or DC. And that's all they ever did was read those comics. So when they try to draw, they don't bother going to art school. They don't take art class. They just mimic and try to copy what they saw in the comic books. And trust me, that's so obvious when you see their final art. They're just aping what they've seen before. There's nothing new. There's nothing original in what they're doing. And then to add insult to injury, they think what they see in today's comics, which are highly sophisticated compared to what was being done in the 40s in this country, all right? They sneer at these great American illustrators from the 40s and 50s, all right? Jack Kirby. Oh, that stuff is crude. It's unpolished. My mind wants to blow up. All right. I mean, my buddy, my art director buddy, who I told you worked at Marvel, DC, Rob Davis. Rob is one of those exceptions. Rob is one of those guys who grew up as a comic fan and reader and studied the old guys frontwards and backwards so that he understood what they were doing. All right. Can he draw better than they? Arguably, yeah, he can. But when he speaks of them, it's with reverence because he understands the fact that every new artist that's coming down the pipe, as you said, is standing on the shoulders of those who went before them. All right. And so you give them that respect, give them that due. All right. I think I want to say 80% of 90% of the artists today you will find in Marvel and DC, the good ones, the ones who are exceptional in storytelling skills, who literally grew up idolizing past masters and understanding the form.
It's so essential. It's so essential. And we're going to take a short break and be back with more comics and stories and adventure.
All right. Sounds good.
Take a second. I'm loving it so far.
I have no time. I have no trouble talking, Rich.
No, I didn't think it would be an issue.
Well, drives my wife crazy. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where a few years back, after we moved here to New England, I moved here to Colorado. I want to say about four years after we were living here. My grandkids were going to the local high schools, and there's one called Rocky Mountain High, and my nephew was going there at the time. My granddaughter wasn't old enough yet; she'd go within a year or whatever. So Alex is going to Rocky Mountain High, and I had met some people there, including one of the art teachers at the high school, at a comic show where our little gang got together. Yeah. This guy came in, and he's still there. He's been the art teacher at this high school for maybe, I don't know, 15 years, whatever. Great guy, super nice guy. So at one point, every year they have what they call a career day, where they bring in professionals from this area, either in the art world or the business world or whatever, for basically the junior class. Mm-hmm. All right. And so they reach out to people. And if you want to do it, basically you get there early in the morning. Everybody meets in the cafeteria, and they set up little panels of these professional people. And during the course of the day, you go from one class to another, talk to a bunch of juniors about your career. Mm-hmm. All right, because obviously they're going to now be applying to colleges before they get to their senior year. They want to give them a broad feeling of what the world's out there, what kind of work they would like to do, get into, whatever, based on seeing the experiences of the people they meet. And I did it for like 3 years in a row, and it was a great time because what it ended up doing was introducing me to other people in the community. All right. For example, Mike Berry. Mike Berry is a professional photographer at CSU, right? And does all the photography for their promotions, their events, their yearbooks, everything else. He's the greatest guy in the world. He's a pro at what he does. And when we were doing career, he had a slideshow of all the different facets of CSU and how it captures it on film. Since that time, with all the comic cons going around the area, Mike goes to the comic shows. All right. And the guys invite him, takes pictures of the guests and does it for the cons and whatever. So one guy, the other guy was a guy named Jack, and what's that from? My wife's going to shoot. But Jack, on the other hand, is the managing editor of the Lincoln Center.
Oh, cool.
All right. He came here from New York, where he had graduated from theater arts and had worked in theater for like 5, 6, 7, 8 years as an actor, doing stage work, all the good stuff. And eventually they needed somebody here to run the Lincoln Center, and there was an ad put out across the country. And Jack came out and applied for the job. So he is the guy who coordinates all the events they had at the Lincoln Center. So every now and then, my wife and I would go to a show, and it's not a surprise, it was Jack in the lobby. There's some people come in saying hi, hey Ron, how's it going? Blah blah blah, right? he knows me as the comic book guy, all right, because we were on panels together. Then the last one that again became a good friend was Nick Armstrong.
I know Nick.
Well, Nick belongs to the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
Okay. And also now has been for the last 6 years the managing promoter of the Fort Collins Comic Con.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the first year Nick and I were on a career camp at the high school. Mike had talked and done his Photoshop thing. All right, this pictures. Then it was my turn, and I started talking about writing comics, what that was all about, my career, how I'd done it, whatever. And then it got over to Nick, and Nick said something that absolutely made me chuckle because I wasn't aware, that I did it. And Nick looked at the students and said, before I get into what I do, he said, I have to tell you, he goes, if you didn't pick up on it, he says, listen to Ron talk. He says, that he is a storyteller shouldn't surprise you because he talks in stories.
Yeah.
All right. So, this is like it's why doing things like this to me comes second nature in that I have an idea because I write stories all the time, every day of my life of, what it's all about, what keeps people interested and when to shut up. when you reach that point, you're rambling that you've got it across and then move on to the next thing or whatever. But most of my comic writing friends have that tendency, and you can sit down with them and have a cup of coffee and you pick it up sooner or later. We tend to talk in stories. I had a dear friend who lived in Brooklyn, New York, and he was a writer. He passed away like 3 years ago. Totally too fast. He had a bad heart. Died young. But his name was Derek Ferguson. And he used to say, if aliens ever come down to Earth for real, they'll take them all of maybe, 2 hours to realize we're storytelling. Yeah, that's what we do. We tell stories. From the cave paintings, France, the hieroglyphics, and everything else. We tell stories.